hope everyone's having a great Friday morning, afternoon, evening, no matter where you are. Thank you so much for joining us for another amazing event hosted by Power to Fly. We're getting ready to chat with our speaker here in just a moment, but before we do that, let me share my screen and we will get today's activity started. So let's see, optimize, there we go. Okay, so as we get going here, I'm just going to go over a couple quick housekeeping notes for everybody, so that way y'all know how to keep up with us or how to participate on today's event. So like I said, first up is participation. You are more than welcome to turn your cameras on if you'd like, share your smiling maskless faces with us safely. If you do turn your camera on or whatever, just know that if you come off of mute for any reason, you will show up on the live recording. So whether you've got your camera on or you have an avatar up or your display name, that is what will show. So if you don't want, if you are, don't want anybody to know you're here and stuff, just make sure you stay on mute, okay? Now, like I said, today's session is being recorded, which is really nice because it makes it so that you don't have to worry about taking notes. You don't have to worry about, if you missed something that Christine says, you can always go back and review the recording later. Now, everybody that registered for today's event, whether you joined us, whether you're not, whether you stay for 5 minutes, hop in and out, doesn't matter. Everybody that registered is going to get an email. It'll be early next week, you'll get it, and it'll have a link to where you can rewatch this recording on our website. Now, if Christine says something today that you are just, mind blown, cannot believe, have to share with a friend or a coworker or a relative, we want to make sure that y'all are able to do that. So if you can't wait the 1 to 2 business days or can't wait until next week, that's cool. You can always head over to our YouTube channel. That's where we're live streaming this as well. So I will share that link with y'all in the thread later on. Now, if you do want to ask a question, please feel free to. You can always write your questions in the chat. And so let's say, you're here and you have a question that you want to ask, but you'd like to be kept anonymous. Not a problem. Just send it directly to me. Send a DM to Meg. You'll find me in the drop-down menu instead of sending the question to everyone in the chat. So I'm happy to keep my eye out over there and raise any questions y'all would like to ask and keep you anonymous. Now, if you are absolutely super like black ops, deep cover, no one can know you're here, that is totally fine. Like, don't sweat it. Just don't come off mute and don't message in the group chat. You can message me directly, whatever you'd like. And if you do want to ask a question and you're not concerned about anonymity, please feel free to put it in the chat. Now, like I mentioned our YouTube channel a little bit earlier, but you can also keep up with us on all social media platforms. We are at Power to Fly on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and I think that might be it. Yeah, pretty sure that's it. So as we go to get started today, just know that if you want to take photos or video as we go, please feel free to, share them out to your social media, to your, your community, and let people know that you're learning with Power to Fly. We want to make sure that we spread the word about these great free resources so as many people can take advantage of them as possible. Now, Christina is here today on behalf of Mural, which is an amazing company. We're so happy to be partnered with them. If you are, if you're listening in on what she's talking about today, or you hear something that really, pricks your ears up, please feel free to check out Mural's page on powertofly.com. It's going to look much like what you see here. You can check out, you can get more information about the company, learn about their benefits. Events will tell you what events like today that these people might be participating in. So it's a really good place to check if you are maybe going into an interview with someone from Mural and want to make sure that you're up to date on what's happening with the company. And then as always, you can check out their open jobs. So hopefully y'all will give that a glance sometime today. Now, I'm really excited to introduce you to today's speaker. So Christina House is Mural's VP of Marketing. She is an analytical and inquisitive professional with a drive to understand why people do what they do. Christina is passionate about using data to fuel creativity and drive results. Christina finds fulfillment in cultivating consistent vision, communication, and collaboration across teams and organizations to achieve their marketing goals. So welcome, Christina. We're so happy to have you today. All right, so we are going to go into our questions for the day. Let me escape out of here. There we go. Okay, I just realized I forgot to share the last little bit of this with you. So the one thing that I want to highlight for y'all before we jump into the questions um, is these are going to be some of the main takeaways for today. Okay, so these are points that we established both by talking with Christina prior to the session, as well as by checking out the questions that you all submitted. So over the course of the chat today, we're going to try and talk about how to foster a data skill set and an insights first mindset. We're going to discuss ways to analyze and transform data to create a strategic plan. And then we're also going to talk a bit about how data can help you fuel your own professional growth. So if there's other questions y'all want to bring to the table, please feel free. But otherwise, that's going to be what we're going to try to cover in today's session. So Christina, hold on here. There we go. So Christina, you should be able to unmute now. I clicked the wrong button for you earlier.
It's okay.
But yeah, so is there anything else that you would like to share with our group before we jump into today's session? Anything that you want to share outside of your biography that we shared with people?
No, I'm excited to be here. You might notice in the background, it is snowing. I'm joining you guys from Burlington, Vermont, and we're expecting about 6 to 10 inches of snow today. So I'm glad I have all of you to talk to because I don't think I'll be getting out very soon. But no, I'm looking forward to chatting a little bit about data and how it's played a role both in my career, but also specifically how it plays a role in marketing strategy. And also happy to answer questions not related to the topic of data. I think that, if there are things that you're curious about related to marketing as a whole, definitely if we have an opportunity to dig in the chat, love to explore those questions as well. And then just keep in mind, we're not going to go into super technical topics. I'm a big believer in the citizen analyst. Everyone should be users of and leveraging data in kind of every aspect, regardless of whether it's marketing or finance or what have you. So definitely want to make sure that we're encouraging that and taking an opportunity to explore what that looks like.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so to kick us off here, one of the questions that we were asked a lot is about what role data can play in a marketing strategy. So let's break that down a little bit to start with.
Yeah, of course. I love this question because I think that, historically, maybe 5 to 10 years ago, data had maybe one role, two roles when it came to marketing as a whole. And oftentimes people really thought of marketing and data being a reporting mechanism, right? How did things perform? And that was kind of exclusively how you leveraged data. But over the course of the last 5 to 10 years, and especially in the last 2 years, data has really become ubiquitous in marketing. It is everywhere, especially in the last 2 years. Almost everything we do is online now. And so you have the ability to kind of track and understand and really capture data on all of the work that you're doing and all of the ways in which you're creating experiences for prospects and customers. So in that it's become ubiquitous with marketing, it really has become an essential part of every aspect of your marketing strategy, from the kind of input phase where you're capturing data and looking at historical data or market research or potentially third-party intent data to understand what's happening with your customers, what do they care about, and then determine what you want to prioritize and build into your plans. And then it's really an essential throughput, right? It's how you power your marketing machine. Not only, the marketing automation that you're going to deploy to guide the customer journey and kind of create connected and personalized experiences throughout the campaigns and programs, but also oftentimes as a throughput, it is a part of, creating really compelling content, surfacing insights based off of that market research, based off of what your customers or prospects care about. And then inevitably it is an output. So I always, when I talk to technical teams, I'm always like, don't forget that marketing is also a technical team. We are one of the biggest producers and consumers of data in most organizations. And oftentimes we're able to surface a lot of insight through the work that we're doing that can help the business learn, and that can also and should also drive how we iterate on our marketing strategy. So you want to make sure that in that throughput phase, when you're kind of designing your marketing plan and starting to think through how you're going to implement it, that tracking and building a strategy for how you track and what data you want to create is an essential part, and it happens early on. So then as you're getting to the stage where you're starting to implement and run programs, you do have that data available to you to start to analyze performance and dig in and improve what you're doing, and inevitably use that data to also showcase to the organization, from the inputs that you put into this, the investments that you've made, and all of the work that you've done, what has that yielded for the company by way of revenue and performance and product adoption?
Ooh, there's my mute button. No, I think that this is honestly absolutely fascinating, because the last time I had anything to do with marketing, I was so low level that I had nothing to do with data. It was more like, here, update this copy, that kind of thing. So I'm loving this, and hopefully, a lot of our attendees today are getting a lot out of it too. But like I said earlier, if we're talking about something and maybe the jargon is either over your head or just not something you've heard before, please feel free to ask us in the chat. We want to make sure that everybody is getting as much as possible out of today's session. All right, so to lead us into the next question, Christina, people had wanted to know what we can do to help foster a data skill set. So when it comes to gathering the data or knowing what's valuable or something, how do people kind of encourage that skill set or help develop it?
Yeah, I think it's really important to think about data skills in two dimensions. And oftentimes, I think everyone thinks about data skills as the hard skills, the technical capabilities, like at the basic level. Can you build and aggregate and analyze data in Excel? Can you use BI platforms? Do you know how to write SQL? Can you do all of the work to get data out of systems and into a data warehouse? And those skills are super important, and especially if you are in an analytics or analyst role, or data science role or data engineering role, having a depth and breadth of data skills, of those technical data skills, is going to be really critical, and cultivating those both through higher education and through kind of like online courses is going to be really important. But when you think about it from like a business user perspective, really, I think those hard skills are really critical, and those technical skills are really critical. And one of the things that I found to be a really useful way to cultivate them is twofold. One, really think about the organizations that you're either hoping to work at, or that you are working at, or you've worked at in the past. What are the technologies that they leverage to access data and to make data accessible to individuals in the business? And go on those technology websites. Oftentimes they have free online learning. They will teach you how to use the technology, and you can build a really basic set of skills and some acumen around how to use those technologies. And then the second dimension, which I think is most important because it's what really motivates building those technical skills, are the soft skills around data. And the whole premise of this conversation is around using data to unlock creativity. And I think that creativity and curiosity are actually two of the most important skills related to data that you can have. Oftentimes, the best analysis and like the deepest insights that are going to be most relevant to the organization are found through asking the best questions. And I've found in kind of building a data skill set, one of the ways to kind of cultivate curiosity is to find data that around a topic that you're really passionate about. So I worked at an analytics company in the past, and we had a platform that was kind of an in-user free platform that people could use to analyze any public data. It was called Tableau Public. And it was amazing to see all of these folks who were probably analysts by day, or worked in marketing departments, and so they were analyzing business data all of the time, or working through business problems. But then in their free time, they were building dashboards and analysis on things like Olympic sports, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, or environmental impact. And they were finding topics that really were passion areas for them, and then starting to explore those topics through data. And it's one of the best ways to kind of learn and uncover kind of new ideas and new ways of potentially working. And so I encourage people, like when you're really trying to cultivate that curiosity muscle when it comes to data and analysis, go find a data set around a topic you really care about and just start asking questions. And then dig deeper after you've asked one question, like beg the question again and start to figure out what are the things that you can kind of start to uncover. And oftentimes I feel like you're going to build, in my experience at least, you'll build the technical skills because you're excited about doing the work. But you're also building the most important skill, in my opinion, which is really creative problem solving and asking the right questions, which comes in handy both working with data day to day, but also really, really beneficial as you're kind of working in your career and you're kind of trying to explore how the business is transforming and changing, and trying to figure out ways to improve upon it, both through data and through work and projects with your teams.
No, I love that advice. I think that's absolutely fabulous. It kind of reminds me of, projects when I was taking foreign languages, and, the professor would want you to like write a report, like a book report, but you had to, it didn't matter if the book was in English, but you had to write it in Spanish or in Italian, but you got to pick whatever book it was. And so like roughly analogous, but I love this idea of trying to dive into a subject matter that you find fascinating as a method of developing these skills. Because you're right, it can be kind of difficult and kind of daunting to kind of dive into that deep end first of here's the skills I'm trying to learn, and I'm also trying to apply them at the same time. I love that. And actually, we've got great comments coming in on the thread here from LaRonda saying building a skill because you are excited about the work, so that you instead of trying to build the skill itself. So I absolutely love that. Thank you, LaRonda. Okay, so when we're trying to do analysis like this, it's very uncommon that we're working alone, right? Most people work in teams. So when it comes to this team approach, how can you make sure that the whole team is approaching that work with this insights first mindset?
Yeah, I think this is I think it's a really important area to think about as a leader, right? I think in order for a team to work together in a similar fashion, or you kind of have to have the right environment, and you need to be cultivating that right environment and making sure that the team has access to what they need to be successful in that environment. So I think the first and most important, like fundamental thing to cultivate an insights first mindset is making sure, or an insights first approach, if you will, is making sure that your team has access to the data that they need. I think that a lot of, we're moving really quickly, and a lot of organizations can overlook the kind of needs of a marketing organization when it comes to data. And so as a leader, if you are hoping to cultivate a team that is curious and going to be coming to the table with insights and analysis on the work that they're doing, and iterating on the work through that analysis, ensuring that you're creating an environment where you have strong connections and partnerships with your internal data teams to create the data models that your team needs, the technology, or at least to govern the technology that they need, is a really, really important fundamental space to invest in. The second part is creating a safe environment. I think that oftentimes leaders and team members talk about like a desire to be data driven and to make sure that we're always surfacing insight. But oftentimes we also don't like to have our preconceived notions or the ideas or beliefs that we hold from previous experiences disproven. And you have to really be willing as a leader and within a team to be proven wrong, and to be open to the fact that there might be insight surfaced by the team that contradicts what you think is, what you believe to be the right approach, and create an environment where like that's a really healthy conversation to have. And I've definitely seen where that can be a challenge in teams if you have folks who hold those strong beliefs but don't want to be proven wrong, and you get a lot of bias in your analysis. You get a lot of like seeking the answer as opposed to trying to solve the problem. And then I think ultimately, it's really important to ensure that there are spaces where you're actually talking about and reviewing data and reporting as a team, and asking questions together. So, analysis can be a pretty independent exercise. You're usually kind of like going through and digging through the data yourself and like getting to the questions that you have. But I found it really beneficial with teams to actually look at like aggregate performance or look at dashboards and identify trends and start to ask those questions live, because that will also start to motivate different ways of thinking across the team and lead to really productive conversations that might lead to deeper analysis that needs to happen. But I think it really helps also reinforce that kind of like, let's be curious as a team, let's dig in and learn. And hopefully it continues like in a cyclical effect, right? Everyone is like more willing to dig in and ask questions as they're seeing things in the data.
I absolutely love that idea, especially what you said about, kind of giving the teams what they need. Because, you can have mountains of data, but if it's not really going to tell you what you are trying to find out, it's not very useful, right? And I love, kind of what you had said earlier about being able to ask those questions, because being in a safe environment, like, means it's okay to fail. It's okay to ask the wrong question. It's okay to think that you're on the right path and realize you're not, and then have to pivot or go, take back a step or whatever. But you're right. There's so much to be said for that safe environment, because if you're trying to do new things, you can't keep going over the stuff you already know. You need to keep learning. So I think that's wonderful. Thank you so much for kind of bringing that up there. All right. Now, if you are kind of just starting to analyze this data, what's kind of the best way to start it, and what should people keep in mind if they are very, very early on in this data analysis journey?
Yeah, sure. I think that it's funny. So when I think about this question, it not just like going straight into analysis. I think the most important thing when you're thinking about like embracing kind of a data-driven or data-informed approach to your marketing or to any kind of aspect of work, one of the most important factors is embracing and thinking about, what do you need to track to eventually analyze, right? Oftentimes, you're not coming into just like, here's a data set, I'm going to go and inspect it. You're often trying to learn something, and you're trying to do something new. And especially in marketing, we're often testing new channels, new programs, new tactics, new ways of targeting. And so as you're introducing anything that's new or potentially making a change, it's really important to ensure that you have a tracking strategy, and that you're capturing the data that you need to eventually analyze. And that you're also thinking not only about kind of like the macro level, like what are the different like channels I need to track, but taking it a step deeper and really thinking about the attributes and the activities, right? So there are specific things that you're going to want to know about maybe certain actions or certain channels. And then there are attributes to them, like time of day, location, different, depending upon what type of marketing you're doing and what organization you work for, there might be different attributes that you really want to make sure you're capturing, so that later you can understand relationships across your data. And then also thinking through the platforms that data is going to be captured in, and how you need to bring all of that data together. So I think that's probably the most important kind of first step, is making sure that you understand how to and what you need to track to basically fuel your analysis. And then the second part, in my experience, is really starting with a question. I think that some of the best analysis and kind of iteration you can make in your marketing strategy through data is starting to like seek to solve a problem and asking questions, and then starting to answer them through data. And then you're able to ask a secondary and tertiary question and get to a much more refined and potentially higher potential of performance answer or outcome or experiment, right? You may have a hypothesis about something working a certain way. And if you have historical data, you can start to dig into and ask the question, like, if I change this, if I target this audience with this channel, what will that yield? And you might see that it's not going to perform very well because historically it hasn't. So then you might ask, like, okay, if I change the way that I'm to a different audience, like, will that change performance? And so you can quickly kind of ask and answer questions to get to a better first experiment, and then continue to iterate faster after that.
Okay, so just kind of a supplemental question for that, mostly just for me. So when you're talking about kind of starting and trying to ask the right questions and asking those secondary and tertiary questions, Does that mean that it's better to start vague and start with a ton of data and to have to sift through, or would that be overwhelming?
Yeah.
Or is it an it depends kind of question? Because I seem to have a knack for asking it depends kind of questions.
I mean, certainly, I think in all aspects, in a lot of these questions, it depends. But I think that you definitely want to avoid basically paralysis by analysis. Like, you can overanalyze situations and questions, and you can kind of try to dig into more and more, and you might just be yielding less value, or kind of getting to a point of diminishing returns, if you will. So there's definitely potential for that if you're trying to kind of tackle a way too big of a problem. But I think oftentimes there's your kind of like strategy development process, you're going to kind of winnow down your question before you're getting to data anyways, because you have to figure out what data you need. And that will refine the scope of the data. And oftentimes your question is going to be like incentivized by something, or it's going to have been motivated by something you saw or something you're trying to accomplish. Like, you either have an objective you're trying to achieve, like you have goals, or you have maybe something, an anomaly that's happening. Like, you're looking at reporting and now you see a new behavior represented in the data, and you're trying to figure out what's driving that. I'm a big believer in the concept of averages lie. So at a top level, you might just see something as like, okay, this is trending down a little bit, or it's trending up a little bit. But really, when you look under the hood, there's one specific driver that might be driving that. And so I think oftentimes you're going to come to a question that's going to help isolate the right, or what the data that you need, kind of by way of looking at either the objective you're trying to accomplish, or specifically something that you're seeing in a report, or in behavior on like your website or in your channels.
Yeah, I love that. And Yvette is chiming in the chat as well, kind of supporting your statement that averages lie. And you're right. It's one of those things where you're kind of oversimplifying, right? It doesn't get you the ability to understand maybe the nuances of what's going on. All right. So let's talk about this whole idea in relation to diversity campaigns.
Yeah.
What kind of data do you need to seek out and to analyze when you're thinking in terms of diversity as opposed to just general marketing?
Yeah. So I think, with any campaign, I would start with identifying, and inevitably, you're going to need to identify data that's going to be associated with the objective you're trying to accomplish. And I think, going back to the question that you just asked before, diversity is a big space, right? There are a number of different things you might be trying to accomplish that ladder up to improving diversity or increasing diversity. So you might have a subset of approaches that you're trying to take to accomplish an overarching goal. So if you've established what your objective is around increasing diversity, or whichever like clear goal you've set around diversity, then isolating a subset of maybe representation is a specific initiative that you're trying to tackle. And then from there, you can start to isolate, okay, well, what data do I need to understand about like our current demographics, around the current initiatives that we have in place. And that will start to help you identify the specific data that you need to track, or data that you need to seek. You might already have that data. And so I think it's really important to think about essentially what data you have based off of like the objective, and winnowing it down to the specific initiatives, and then the questions that you'll be seeking to answer. And then essentially, if you don't have data associated with those areas, what can you start to introduce to capture that data that doesn't detract from, the employee or user experience, and in some cases could be additive to the employee or user experience. I think about that a lot, both as a marketer and as a team member. Oftentimes we want to use information and data to improve the experience. And so how can you also capture information in a way that's additive to the experience as well? And I think especially in this specific area, it's really important to consider that as a part of the overarching process.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm reminded of a new feature on Powerfly that we introduced a couple months ago that was like self-identifying if you are within a certain demographic, a certain affinity group, whatever. And you're right, it was designed not only to give us data on who our customer or client base is, so we can better serve you, but it's also to make sure that like you get invited to chats that would probably interest you. You don't have to go, but it's a kind of a bit of a nudge of like, hey, you said you're interested in this and we're doing this like in 3 weeks or something, you might be interested. But yeah, you're right, it's one of those things where if you're collecting all of this, it should be done in a way that's not detrimental to customer experience. So yeah, thank you for making that point there. Now, when we are talking about like looking at this data and trying to track different metrics, what are some of the best metrics that you should be tracking if you're building a net new marketing machine? It can be very, very scary to kind of start from scratch. So what do you recommend?
Yeah. So there's probably a few different ways to go about answering this question. I think in particular, there's definitely a template out there that, these are your core marketing metrics, and you can definitely deploy that. I would encourage you to embrace the fact that in a lot of cases, you can deploy those templates and frameworks where you have a clear marketing funnel and you kind of map that funnel all the way through to revenue, and then from revenue through to retention and upsell. And that will really help you, especially in the early days, tie your marketing work back to business yield, right? What value are you really driving for the company based off of what you are investing and what the team is investing in? And that can look like everything from identifying early indicator KPIs, things like site traffic, leads, qualified leads that then yield opportunities and opportunities to pipeline and revenue. What I'd also encourage in that specific framework is not only stopping at revenue, but thinking about and ensuring that you're also building out how you're contributing to net retention. So especially if you work in technology and you work in with a SaaS product, oftentimes you're also you're generating revenue through your customers growing. And as a marketing organization, you also want to be contributing to that. So mapping the early indicators to your contribution to customer adoption and customer upsell is a really critical component of representing marketing's contribution. And again, that's a much more kind of like traditional templated approach to really laying the basics of, how is marketing contributing to the business. But the thing that I would encourage, new marketing leaders or marketing leaders who are establishing a new department and really trying to think through what are the things that we need to track, what are the core KPIs that are going to be most important for us to not only learn and improve our marketing strategy, but also to educate the business and to help the business kind of learn what we're learning from the market and to kind of adapt accordingly. It's really establish metrics that are really focused on anchoring on how your prospects and customers kind of get value from your product and your solution. And oftentimes like a funnel kind of maps to that as well. Like eventually if people are getting value, they're going to purchase your product. But I think when you look at it that way and you start to frame, how do we get people to value and what is that path to value? Oftentimes they might surface on your website because they're trying to solve a problem. And through your website, they might learn how you solve that problem. And they might be inclined to then, if you have a free product, sign up for that product. Or if you don't, reach out to your sales team through a form or download an asset to learn more about it. But when you think about kind of what is that point of value, or what value does your solution deliver for prospects and inevitably customers, and anchor there, and then build early indicators and lagging indicators, which will likely map to how you monetize and sell the product, you'll likely get some unique KPIs and some unique specific measures that you're really going to focus on that are going to be much more meaningful for your business and allow your team to optimize specifically to your customer's journey and also the value your product delivers and improving that value over time. So yeah, I think that again, there's definitely a set of like core KPIs that I would ensure that you establish ways to track them, but then really anchor in on building a more customized set of of data that you track that really ladders up to value. And then the last thing that I would encourage is, in a lot of cases, you're going to have what I consider, you have a funnel in like the very basic format, but eventually you kind of get to a place where you have loops and levers, if you will. You have levers, like channels that feed your growth loops. And so you really should be thinking about your conversion rates as well across those two dimensions, and then essentially mapping that all back to how you generate value. But I would not neglect conversion rates. Even in the very early days, don't look at just absolute values. Definitely pay attention to the entire machine and how data matriculates across, or how users kind of move across that journey.
Have there been any, again, just as an aside that I'm wondering, listening to you, have there been any metrics that you've were or thought for a while were, kind of those bedrock ones that you've since learned are maybe not as useful to you than others? Because I'm thinking of some of the metrics that we track. When I was in the marketing team, we looked at how many eyeballs, how many people had opened a specific email that we sent out, that kind of thing, which I know is incredibly basic version of what we're talking about. But yeah, has there been anything that you were like, oh yeah, we absolutely have to track this, and then over time you're like, yeah, it's not exactly as useful as I thought it was going to be?
Yeah, certainly. I think that oftentimes what you end up finding is that and like there's a relationship across data, because people are not linear, and they don't just stay in one place. They don't just do one thing. And so oftentimes you might track something and find that that was really not the thing to optimize for, but it's still something you might want to track. So I used before, like, traffic as an example of an early indicator of interest. It's a really important thing to track, but depending upon the product that you sell and the market that you're in, people may come to your product in a different way, or they might discover you in a different way. And so you might find that a metric that is like a standard that a lot of people look at may not be the right metric for you to fixate on and to really like claim as your North Star. But again, I have found that it is often very unique to your business, the product that you sell, the way in which you monetize and sell that product. It's really going to determine the most important KPIs. And then you'll have those other data points that you're going to need to kind of understand the relationships across those KPIs. But something that was really valuable for you, maybe in a previous experience with a different product, may not be as valuable for you working in a different industry or in a different business altogether.
Okay, thank you. And thank you so much for indulging my questions that follow up here. If y'all have questions that you would like to ask of Christina, please feel free. You can put them in the chat. We'd be happy to make sure we touch on them today. All right, so we've talked a lot, and obviously, the title of the chat is ways to unlock your creativity. Could you share an example from your work history, like a way that data has helped you to unlock that creativity?
Yeah, of course. So I think oftentimes when we I hear this a lot in marketing, or like when I talk to folks in marketing, people can kind of fall into like two buckets. Some folks that are like a little bit more revenue aligned and like more data and technically aligned, and then others that are more like creative. And in my experience, some of the most creative and innovative initiatives are really born out of data and kind of the connectivity between the technology, the data, and the ideas that are bred out of some of the kind of constraints potentially that those introduce, or the insights that they surface. And I think that's where, in my experience, I've seen data really unlock creativity or fuel creativity, if you will. It's in like surfacing new insights. So you may have like a preconceived notion or a specific approach that you think is the right way to do things, to go to market, a campaign that you've run in the past that's been highly effective, for example. And through analysis, you might be able to surface insight into maybe a different idea that you might want to test. And what I've found is that like that insight that you can gain from doing analysis up front ahead of just running a campaign based off of maybe intuition or past experiences, you're going to be able to potentially fuel and create a much more creative approach that will likely resonate better for your audience. So that's where, like, I really think of data as a very important input to some of your most creative endeavors. I don't think it's the only input, and also we should take into account that data is not just quantitative, it is qualitative. So oftentimes, you have research that spends a lot of time with design teams because you really want to understand what's meaningful, useful, and valuable to your customers, your prospects, and your users. So that research, that qualitative research and quantitative research together can really help you form hypotheses and insights that are going to hopefully help you create like a more creative or innovative approach to either a problem, a campaign, a product experience, for example.
Very cool. Okay. All right. Now we did have a really great question in the chat from Laura or Laura, not sure how you pronounce yours. They had asked, how can you double check your insights when you're a beginner? How can you be sure that the data that you're putting together is reliable and set up correctly? They said, for example, in GA. I'm going to guess that that's not Georgia, but maybe a shortening or an acronym that I'm not aware of.
Google
what do you think about
Analytics.
that? Google Analytics.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There we go. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, how can you do this to kind of double check your work and make sure it's all set up right if you are just starting out?
Yeah, I think if you're just starting out, it is really useful. One of the things that I found to be extremely beneficial in my career is, one, I think this is just at a high level, always having mentors in the spaces that I want to learn in. And I think mentorship relationships can look different. I have a lot of different types of mentors, but having a mentor in a space that you really want to learn in, and that who's willing to, especially in some of those scenarios, like talk through some of those things that are like, hey, I'm really curious. Like I've been looking at GA or Google Analytics and trying to solve for a specific outcome or trying to track something specific and kind of understand what's happening with my site. Having someone who you're able to kind of bounce those ideas off of, and obviously finding mentors in a specific space, especially when you're new, can be challenging, but ideally that's where working with organizations where you're able to get connected with folks who are in that field and pursuing that as much as possible, I think is a really important aspect to just having someone who you can bounce those ideas off of. In addition, I spend a lot of time building skills for things that I don't necessarily do in my day-to-day job. And I think I would encourage folks who are trying to build net new skills to really pursue online learning courses. And through those online learning courses, you're often kind of introduced to communities. So a lot of the kind of specific practice online learning courses for data science or analytics will also connect you with other analysts. So you're able to, and this is kind of outside of your organization, if you're really pursuing this independent of your company, you can get connected with community members. And oftentimes I've found some of the best ways to, if I'm seeing something and I really want someone else's perspective on it, having someone in the community who I can connect with and kind of work through those problems has been really beneficial. And then the third, definitely, if this is something you're working on within your organization and you have the luxury of having counterparts and team members who also work in that space, I'm a big believer in not going it alone and ensuring that if you are working through analysis, that you are kind of, if you're seeing something that doesn't look right, you are checking with other team members to ensure that you're seeing how this data is being processed and taken in, and then also making sure that it's rendering and being kind of computed properly, and you're understanding field definitions, and all of this goes back to establishing great governance in your tracking strategy, right? Oftentimes, not establishing governance up front, you can run into situations where people are making assumptions about different data fields. And then inevitably you might have, 5 different ways people are interpreting, site prospects or conversion rates and different kind of terms that have legacy meanings from other experience. So I definitely encourage establishing that governance also up front. And then, yeah, as you're building that skill, especially early on, and you're kind of doing it independently, spend time with mentors and in those communities if you're able to access them, and really ask questions, be willing to learn and be willing to be wrong a lot. That's my experience. Be willing to be wrong a lot and as much as possible, because you'll learn more that way.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that's one of, I get to sit through these chats and I learn so many great things from, literally just doing my job, which is kind of great. But one of the ones that kind of stuck with me, I think it was from a past summit. Somebody had said, that people they don't learn from success. You learn from failure. So if you see somebody who is successful, that is someone who has failed a lot. So trying to remember that, at least for me, it makes these kinds of things like starting out on something brand new a lot less intimidating, because it's like, all right, well, I've never done this before. So and I'm going to learn more when I fail than when I succeed. So let's just, tackle it and see what comes after. So thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point to make. All right. So let's say that you are a marketing professional and you want to utilize all of these, these ideas and these skills to upscale your own professional growth. How can you accomplish that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've seen is just by working with data and spending more time investing in building a data skill set and starting to ask and answer questions in your specific career development area. You're going to learn faster. You can kind of learn and kind of have experience by proxy by asking questions before you're actually having to, run a full campaign or run a full experiment. If you have the luxury of having historical data, you can test your hypothesis against the data multiple times to get to a better first experiment or a better first iteration of a campaign. And so already where, if you didn't have access to the data and you weren't really thinking about this from a data as an input or doing the analysis up front perspective, you would have to kind of test idea one, let it play out for maybe a few weeks if it's an experiment, maybe a few months if it's a new campaign, and then learn after each implementation. But you can really, by doing the analysis up front and kind of having data that is tracking against your historical campaigns, you definitely want to dig into that and basically learn faster. And that will accelerate your ability to deliver new campaigns and programs to market, and inevitably will help you kind of cultivate more success in your career a little bit faster through kind of learning through each analysis. And it also gives you a deeper understanding of the business. So one of the things that I've seen in organizations is the folks that are really entrenched in the data often have some of the best understanding of how the organization works, because you have kind of pipelines that move data around, and then the data itself is really like the fuel of the business, right? It's how the company works. And so the folks that really understand the relationship across data and can see how different data sets move across different areas of the business often are able to understand also the relationships across strategy across the company, and can be better partners and better leaders to their teams, because they're able to embrace and take on work in a way that's understanding of what their counterparts across teams and departments are trying to accomplish, and also the resources they need and the data that they're tracking and the relationships across that data as well.
Okay. We've got a couple great questions popping up in the chat thread, so I want to try and get to those too if we can. The first one we got asked about where can you find free projects to do to help develop these skills? Now, I have an idea based on some other stuff that we like, other chats that I've overheard, but I'm interested to see what you think, Christina. If you're looking to develop those skills, is it something that, like you said, should you kind of make it more of an independent study thing, or is there maybe places that you can go to be, posed problems that you can then kind of use as a way to develop your skills, as opposed to sort of doing an independent study kind of thing and trying to figure out and gain these skills along the way?
Yeah, there are a number of different like communities and like meetups and events that come to mind. Like there are a lot of user groups and data oriented communities where you can both like experience and learn through like case studies and other people's experience. Like they'll present kind of work that they've done and ways they've kind of gone through data discovery at their company. And oftentimes they'll also share data sets and data sources that you're able to work through. And so I think any one of those kind of communities or events are a great way to kind of dig in. I used to participate oftentimes in the Tableau user groups when I worked there, and I would learn more from our customers than I ever could from just like doing the work myself or like digging through the data on my own. So I definitely would encourage like finding a community around kind of the topic that you're hoping to kind of like dig into and where your passion lies, and seeking some case studies or even just learnings from the folks that are participating there. And then there's also, I'm trying to think, I'm blanking on the name of the organization, but there are organizations that have, they'll surface like data sets with kind of like questions or problems that will basically allow you to kind of like have a starting ground, right? To kind of work through and learn from the data. But I'm blanking on the name. I'll have to look it up and drop it in the chat. But you said you had an idea, Meg. I'm curious to know what your idea was.
All right. So to your point, if you think of some of those groups or something, please feel free to let us know. You can always email Paloma and we can attach all that stuff to the video or to the rewatch email when that goes out. And I'll remind you on that when I send out an email after too. For my own mind, a lot of the stuff that I've heard on past chats, especially with people trying to get into a specific area, one of the things that past speakers have recommended is to reach out to maybe a nonprofit or an org that you are particularly passionate about, and either work with them, like offer like, hey, I'm trying to develop these skills. Can I help you with some of your data analysis? Or kind of start your own project around it and then see if it might be useful to them. So we've had people suggest this for everything from graphic design to ways to create community events, all kinds of stuff. So that might be something that might be helpful to y'all if you've got, maybe a cause that's near and dear to your heart. Now, we did have this question that I thought was very, very interesting. This person had asked, is a little bit more specific. How do you showcase your successes as a marketer utilizing data when you've been in roles that may not be specific to traditional wins? They said, as in like having a support role that doesn't own a campaign, but contributes to the overall success of the team. So this I thought was really, really interesting because like I have no idea how this would work. So what would you suggest to this person?
Yeah, I really love this question. And I learned a lot about it. I worked with a really phenomenal brand leader, marketing leader. And one of the things that he was so diligent about was making sure the creative team, the content team, the teams that, not as traditionally or directly tied to revenue or MQLs or lead delivery, their work was always very clearly tied to data and performance. And we're able to show the value of that work. And honestly, it does require a little bit of creativity and kind of thinking a step deeper around kind of what the work you do like ends up yielding for the overarching objective of maybe the campaign that it's a part of, or so for example, if you're working on SEO content and you are a content writer, maybe by default, you don't think like content can be measured from a performance standpoint, but you can look at what are the overarching objectives of your website and your acquisition strategy, and then start to extrapolate what are the KPIs that you can measure from a content perspective that ladder up to those overarching objectives. So maybe your overarching objective is an acquisition related objective. You can track how many people are surfacing to this site through those specific landing pages where you've created content, and then how many people are inevitably then signing up from that page. And those are kind of like very early indicator KPIs that you can associate with your work that then ladder up to that overarching objective. There's other and like areas of marketing that are even more kind of offline that I have found, folks can feel like they're even more challenging to track. Another area that I've seen teams kind of struggle with, like, how do we show performance, is like positioning and messaging work done by product marketing. It's super meaningful, very critical for the business, but it can be really hard to like show like this was the right thing to do and it delivered value. A way that I've seen teams tackle that is through basically rolling out new positioning and messaging and enabling the sales team on it, and then going back through and looking at things like Gong and chorus calls, because that's data, and tracking, you know, where the positioning and messaging has been leveraged by the sales team in their calls. You know, what was the performance of the, or how well or how high of a conversion rate, and what pipeline were yielded from those specific conversations. So there's oftentimes a way, if you get creative and you really think about what you're trying to accomplish with the work that you're doing, to either track it and to tie it back to data, and then ultimately back to business performance.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for diving in on that, because that was very, very interesting question. And, you know, kind of I feel like a thing that a lot of us struggle with, mostly because most of us work in team environments. All right, we did have one more question, and I want to make sure we've only got 5 minutes left. This time always goes so quickly. And I want to make sure we're running on time for everybody's calendars. Simon had a really good question asking, what's the best procedure to tailor the tools to the data when we are not sure of the origin of the problem? And I feel like this is really interesting, because like you could feel like you're trying to hit a running target, right?
Yeah, it's a question I'm kind of curious about the origin of it, because I think that, you know, there's not a one size fits all in my experience for any technology stack. Oftentimes you are trying to basically fit technologies together. And when you think about your data strategy, it's not unique. You know, you're not like there's not just a template for like, these are the right tools for this specific way of working and this specific data strategy. Oftentimes, you're having to evaluate the organization, the teams, the business strategy, and then figuring out what are the different technologies you need to build together, how do they integrate, to then inevitably build a tech stack that's going to support the type of analysis that your team needs to do, and the type of data that you're trying to access and work with. So I think it's a super complicated, it can be simplified, but it is definitely unique to every organization. And so I think depending upon really what you're trying to accomplish, you're going to have to spend time like interviewing and like working with your teams to understand like, what are the needs, what type of data are we creating, and then go from there for finding the right technologies to put in place to solve for, you know, the analysis work that you need to do.
Okay, great. All right, so for the last couple of minutes here, I'm going to ask you one last question. We'll treat it like kind of a popcorn round. Let's talk about your experience within the marketing field. What sort of, have you experienced any evolution within marketing? And either way, how do you see the future of marketing itself? Obviously, you don't have a crystal ball, none of us do, but what do you think is coming along, or what do you think has changed thus far?
Yeah, so the evolution of marketing thus far feels, how far do we go back? It's definitely, I think marketing has transformed pretty dramatically. And I think that a lot of folks, I was talking about this earlier when I touched on the fact that like I talked to technical teams, like the IT team and the data team, about the fact that marketing is really also a technical team. I think that's been one of the big transformations of marketing. You know, it's not just big ideas and intuition. We're a very like data informed, data driven organization with a lot of technology that powers the way that we work and helps kind of automate and personalize the experiences that we deliver. So I think that's been one of the really big transformations that has happened with marketing, in particular around data. You know, I think we used to use data primarily as an output. It was like, hey, marketing's performing really well. Here are the things that are going great. But now it's ubiquitous, it's consistent and pervasive across everything that we do. So I think that's been a really big transformation. And then from like a trends and things that I'm seeing and things that I'm excited about are really the way that marketing and growth are embracing the concept of community as one of the primary levers for kind of how organizations grow and deliver value. I think that before there was a time period where communities started to be introduced to like technical products, and it was really kind of like an organic customer experience. And I think one of the things that I'm really excited about is the way that organizations are embracing communities more and more, and thinking about them as a part of their holistic strategy, and how they can like build and cultivate community with their customers and integrate that into their brand, and really bring their voice of their customer and that community engagement all the way through to, how they represent the company and the product itself.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember when I was a kid looking at marketing kind of stuff, and it was most about like product placement was the kind of thing that you saw most often. But yeah, you're right. That idea of creating a community within and around whatever your product or your service is, yeah, you're right. It's much more effective at not only connecting, like drawing people into your org or to your company or your product or whatever, but also a way of keeping people connected, not only to you, but also to each other. So I very much love that idea. Now I know you've got to go, so we're going to wrap this up real quick, but I want to say thank you to Christina. You came beyond prepared for today. I'm so happy to have spent the afternoon learning from you. Huge thank you to our attendees. Y'all had amazing questions that you submitted before today, and I was so appreciative of the questions that y'all put in the chat today as well. Thank you for that. If you are at all interested in Mural, please make sure you check them out. I'm going to share that link again in the chat thread here in just a moment. And don't forget, to check out Mural, as well as some of the other virtual offerings from Power to Fly. If you are new to us, welcome. We hope you had a good time. We hope you'll come back and see us soon. And if you are one of our frequent flyers, thank you so much for coming today, and we cannot wait to see you again on another upcoming session. Hope everybody has a great Friday. Christina, you got to bounce, and we're cutting it short.
Thank
so
you.